Just about an hour ago, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney endorsed Erin O'Toole's bid for the Conservative leadership. He highlights several reasons for backing O'Toole, like his bilingualism and his understanding of Western Canadian issues. But Kenney also stated, quote, "No one will have their deeply held beliefs dismissed as stinking albatrosses under Erin O'Toole's leadership." So what are the implications of Kenney's endorsement? Not only for O'Toole's campaign, but also for Peter McKays. What carries more weight? McKays' $1 million in fundraising or backing from a premier? Time for the Power Panel. In Calgary, Jason Markisoff of McLean's joins us. Over in Toronto, host of the Hurley Burley podcast and partner in the Gandalf Group, David Hurley. Sitting next to him is Marcella Monroe, principal at WPM Public Affairs. And here with me in studio, former Director of Policy to Stephen Harper, Rachel Curran. She's now with Harper and Associates. And next to her, Corey Tonight, former Director of Communications to Prime Minister Stephen Harper, now a partner with Rubicon Strategy. Hi, everybody. Hi, thanks very much for coming in. Corey, I want to say a special thank you. I texted him as this news came out and said, can you just please come in to talk about this? Because this is exciting. So I will start with you. How significant is this for Erin O'Toole's campaign? Does this sort of cement this race as more of a two-horse race than a coronation for Mr. McKay?
Well, if the polls from earlier this week that had Erin at about 4% are any indication, it would have to be one hell of a bump, I think, to really change things. But I would say this. Endorsements, generally speaking, don't count for much. I think where they do are the kind that we saw in the U.S. cycle most recently. Like if Pete Buttigieg endorses you and he came off the ballot, then that's pretty meaningful. If you think of the last leadership race when Kevin O'Leary came off the ballot and endorsed Max Bernier, that was, I think, a pretty meaningful event. But in terms of endorsements outside of people who are actually on the ballot, I think they're
even
less.
Kenney, who's a kind of a very popular figure among Conservatives.
You just don't see a lot of correlation in past races between those kinds of endorsements. I'm a bit surprised that Jason would do it. I think there's probably, in the fullness of time, only one person who will remember that endorsement, and it's probably going to be Peter McKay. That might be a little awkward if he wins. But I don't think it really changes the trajectory of time.
Rachel, is it what's behind this? Is it just a big dislike of Peter McKay, or do you think it's a genuine endorsement of O'Toole?
Yeah, no, I think it's a genuine endorsement, and it is a big endorsement. Like I understand what Corey's saying about the value of endorsements generally, but Jason Kenney is seen as a leader in the Conservative movement. The message he sent when he was issuing this endorsement outlined sort of very clearly what Conservatives were looking for in a leader, and I think that analysis is absolutely bang on. So I don't think it's worthless by any means. I think it is an important endorsement. I guess, look, here's where I would agree with Corey. Is it enough? Erin O'Toole is a fantastic candidate. He's reliable, he's smart, he's got cabinet experience, he's got broad private sector experience. But at this stage, it looks like Peter McKay is so far ahead. And when members,
a lot of money.
And when members are thinking about winnability, who's best positioned to win the next election against Justin Trudeau, they seem to be looking primarily at Peter McKay. He was just in Calgary earlier this week, and had 650 plus people out to see him there. So it looks like he's attracting a lot of support and attention from Albertans as well.
I just got a text message from Mr. McKay's spokesperson. I want to read you the statement that they've released in response to this endorsement. Politics is about making choices, and Peter respects the Premier's choice. As the next Prime Minister, he will work with Premier Kenney and every other Premier across this country, regardless of who they endorse. He made it very clear this week in Alberta that he would fight for the interests of Albertans, and got over 500 endorsements at an event on Tuesday night in Calgary. That is what really matters in this campaign, and that is from Peter McKay's spokesperson. David, does this kind of endorsement make a difference?
Well, I'm kind of surprised to hear Corey downplay it so much. I mean, we literally have just seen a situation in the U.S. Democratic nomination where the endorsement of Joe Biden by Representative Clyburn in South Carolina, has literally changed the entire race, changed the complexion of the race in its entirety by that kind of endorsement. I don't know whether Jason Kenney is Representative Clyburn, but he has been described to me as the most important or influential Conservative in Canada. I don't suppose he went out on a limb intending to be embarrassed by this. He must think that O'Toole will make him look respectable. And as somebody who from the beginning has thought that McKay is a pretty lousy candidate and that there's a lot of time between now and voting, to me it feels like it could be more of a turning point than Corey and Rachel were letting on.
Marcella, I know you spent a lot of time in Alberta. I wonder if maybe it doesn't, I don't know how it affects the polls immediately, that kind of thing, but I know the narrative of this campaign. There's a lot of people supporting O'Toole have been trying to push this narrative that it's not a coronation for Mr. McKay, that he is going to be very competitive. And I wonder if this just sort of cements that narrative. I don't know the exact quantitative impact it's going to have, but does it cement that narrative?
Well, I'll tell you a bit of gossip before I comment on that, which is that a couple weeks ago I happened to be hanging out with a good friend of mine who happens to be an Alberta Conservative, who happens to also be supporting Mr. McKay. And he told me that they were getting a little bit irritated because they were hearing that Premier Kenney at that point was phoning into his long list of Conservative contacts in other parts of the country to advocate against Peter McKay. And so to me today, what's really important about this is, for whatever reason, Mr. Kenney thinks it's important that he make this endorsement public when at least the folks that I've talked to say that he's been working against Mr. McKay for a couple weeks now. So this isn't, as I don't think, cut and dried as Rachel or Corey are saying. I also, I've been on the other side of campaigns from Jason Kenney, and I think that we all know what a fierce campaigner he is, that when he puts his elbow grease into something, he's never done anything in his life in politics, I think, that has been sort of halfway there. So I think it's quite stunning that a premier who has a huge agenda on his plate and a big full plate full of challenges that he needs to spend time paying attention to would come out and endorse Mr. O'Toole. I don't think it means he won't do more than just write an email.
Jason, you're obviously in Alberta. What are your impressions? How do you think it's going to be perceived there?
I mean, in Alberta, Peter McKay has quite a bit of support, as others have said. I was actually just, I missed him in Calgary because it was on Super Tuesday, but I actually just came back from Edmonton, where I saw him speak to students last night, and a pretty good crowd at an Edmonton hotel this morning. He has quite a bit of support in the federal caucus. Jason Kenney may turn some of that because he has a lot of influence in the federal Alberta caucus as well. This probably gets his entire UCP caucus behind him. But keep in mind that Jason Kenney has influence well beyond this province in two very significant communities. The multicultural community around in the GTA and other major cities, and also the social conservative community as one of the leaders in that movement, the old reform social conservative movement. And he directly addressed that with that stinking albatross comment in his letter. So he'll be able to mobilize that. Just to what Marcella was saying, rumor was that Kenney had been doing some of that as well for Andrew Scheer in 2017, much more on the down low. It's striking that he went out publicly and endorsed. A lot of this might well have to do with his dislike of Peter McKay going back to their days in cabinet together.
Yeah, is this, Corey, basically, is this more of a sort of hate on for Peter McKay than it is an endorsement for Erin O'Toole?
I'm not sure I'd go as far as hate, but it's certainly a rivalry. Like it's not a.
It's a pretty big deal to come out as a sitting premier and endorse someone.
It's not quite a Paul Martin versus Jean Chrétien level rivalry. But there's definitely a rivalry there, and there's I think an ideological complexion to it as well around the social conservative side of things. Jason is a lifelong social conservative, and those issues are very important to him. It's only in a race where I think Jason would have liked to have been with a lot of other candidates and kind of tried his hat on with a few of them, except nobody really came to the table. So
we know he was talking to Ron Ambrose, for example.
Ambrose and also to Baird.
Yes.
I think would have been very comfortable with Poilievre as well. But I think it's that dynamic that we've talked about before, where there's kind of an alliance, Reform Party side of the party, and then there's more of a Tory-ish side of the party. And I would take this as Jason probably would have been more comfortable with anyone, probably would have never endorsed O'Toole if anyone from that side of the party had been in. But I think he's probably the closest to that complexion of the two of them.
David's surprised that you're downplaying this.
Well, I think the big difference is that, if we're talking about comparisons, and I mentioned this earlier, to the U.S. side of things, when people come off the ballot and endorse, I think it's very meaningful. Depending on how much time they have to spend on these things, I do think Jason's got a pretty full plate. But I just don't think it's a huge pivot point in the campaign. It will be helpful in making it a more interesting race to cover and to comment on. It
This is
tightens
true,
it up a bit.
Rachel has a skeptical smile on her face right now.
Well, yeah, look, so both of these candidates, Peter McKay and Erin O'Toole, come from the PC side of the Conservative Party. Neither of them are old reformers. I'm not sure there's really much difference between them on matters of policy or ideology. But look, here's what I think was important about Jason Kenney's message. He really identified areas, I think, very accurately where the next Conservative leader needs to do some work. The outreach to new Canadians in particular that Jason Kenney really did on behalf of Stephen Harper and was so successful on that front. Led in part to the majority victory in 2011. That work needs to start from scratch again. He's absolutely right in saying that we have really fallen behind there, and that work needs to start over. The necessity that the next Conservative leader be bilingual, the necessity that they be able to strike a common sense balance between environmental protection and resource development. Look, he really hit all of these very important issues that the next leader is going to address.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.